conspiracy, according to her, because everything else ties into it. Now, once that live stream is going, we'll be able to begin. And there it is, starting the stream, making it full screen, and here we go. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Vinny Eastwood Show. I'm not a credible journalist. I'm an incredible journalist. And my very special guest joining me today is from CrowdsourceTheTruth.com, the ever-illustrious and fabulous Jason Goodman. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on, Vinny. It's a pleasure to be here.
So the way we're starting off these shows is to give a wee bit of a plug to the Advanced New Zealand Public Party and wishing to reclaim New Zealand for all the people and getting on international experts to give their advice and their first impression. So, Jason, if you wouldn't mind, give us your first impression of the Nzpp.
Well, I liked it. You know, you introduced me to it. I wasn't aware of it before. I'm in New York, as people might be able to tell, or we'll soon show them. So I wasn't aware of it, but it seems like it's got the absolutely right idea. This Agenda 21, which, you know, we've seen Jacinda wearing the pin. We've seen Tedros Adhanom, the Director General of the World Health Organization, wearing that pin. And I think a lot of people don't realize what these symbols mean. They're extremely important to the people wearing them and to the message that they send out to the others that are observing it. So I think what that New Zealand public party is trying to do is extremely important.
That's right, and indeed this is the first thing I've actually ever seen in terms of a political party taking on these issues as a negative. All the rest of them are either, no, it's a conspiracy theory, but we're deeply involved.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. And the other thing, they like to use the word conspiracy theory to just discredit anyone who is exploring anything outside the mainstream. It's kind of a catch-all phrase that they use. They'll say somebody is discredited, they've been debunked, they're a conspiracy theorist, but they don't ever actually provide any evidence. And by the way, a conspiracy theorist, you know, there are tons of criminal conspiracies that exist. And if you're trying to solve a crime, you begin, of course, with a theory formulated based on evidence that you find, and then ultimately you use that evidence to prove the allegations and charge someone with a criminal conspiracy. I know your viewers know, Vinny, that in the 1960s, the United States Central Intelligence Agency went on a specific campaign to basically use that term conspiracy theorist to smear anyone who was questioning the Warren Report, which was the official government report in the United States about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Of course, there's tons of conflicting evidence, rushes to judgment, etc. And that crime has never been properly investigated or solved. So anyone who is presenting evidence or exploring evidence in that might be a conspiracy theorist, but the abuse of that term has just turned it into such a pejorative phrase that a lot of people I encounter think that the word conspiracy means that something is false.
That's right, and we did a interview yesterday morning with a reporter from stuff.co.nz, which I relayed that information about the declassified document that was sent out to, I believe, almost every news outlet in America at the time of the Warren Commission report to demonize absolutely anyone and everything with the terms conspiracy theorist or conspiracy theory, and that people believe that conspiracies don't exist. Well, have a look at the law books. Conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to commit fraud. These are legal terms and definitions, and they have attempted to muddy the waters to demonize and discredit anybody who looks for the truth and finds it.
Yeah. Now, Vinny, what about the possibility of a conspiracy to convince the leaders of world governments and the citizens of those countries that there is a deadly contagion around that is airborne, infectious, and the only way to protect yourself is to wear a mask everywhere you go, and now eye goggles are being recommended by the United States. I don't know what this guy is, Dr. Fauci. He's not the Surgeon General. He's the director of the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases. Suddenly this guy has been made the chief medical something or other of the United States and putting restrictions on everyone's lives, closing businesses, etc. It seems to me, Vinny, they might be marching us towards this world where you got to have a chip in your hand, and that thing is going to have to be scanned with your inoculation history. You know, my bank will not allow me into the bank unless I make an appointment on my cell phone and have a face mask when I go in there. The supermarket will not let me purchase food unless I go in there with a face mask. And there's a lot of people that have all kinds of respiratory ailments, and even just anyone who's concerned with their general health, walking around with a face mask on all day. Particularly, I don't know how to convert this to Celsius, but it was 94 degrees here in New York City today. So, I mean, that's like 30 or something, super hot, and they want you to walk around wearing a face mask
and rebreathe your own carbon dioxide. And indeed, one of my listeners sent me a piece of information the other day that one of her relatives or sister or something of that nature was working in the medical fields in Australia, and she was wearing a mask for 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, and now it's actually caused her permanent lung damage, and she will never recover.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised. And the ironic thing about this is that there is no clinical trial. You know, you speak to a medical doctor and you tell them, hey, you know what, colloidal silver or vitamin C or any of these things. You know, I used hydrogen peroxide to cure an infection in my tooth. I didn't need a root canal. A medical doctor will tell you, oh, you know, that's anecdotal. There's no double-blind, placebo-based clinical trial showing the efficacy and safety of that treatment. So just because it worked for you doesn't mean it's going to work. But here in the United States and other countries, we see medical doctors prescribing this. I mean, not technically prescribing, but recommending and even mandating in certain places this prophylactic medical device, irrespective of your personal health or your health history. They want everybody to wear this thing. That is not the way medicine works. It's just absolutely absurd.
Absurdity is, I think, in the eye of the beholder.
The new normal.
Well,
it's the new normal, right?
If I may, I believe it's in the eye of the beholder. For example, if I was theoretically a ruthless criminal sociopathic scumbag that actually wanted to cause massive damage to public health using brainwashing as a methodology, this would make perfect sense to me.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, it's more than just damage to public health. I was just walking around New York City earlier today, and so many businesses are shuttered. I went to have a haircut at a place that I've been going to for about 22 years, owned by a French immigrant, now U.S. citizen, and his wife. And there's a guy who came to the United States with just a few $100 in his pocket and had a job when he arrived here, but he, you know, eventually came to own that hair salon, and now he and his wife have built a successful business, bought a house, and he's in real serious trouble. They were forced to close for 4 months. The landlord for the place still wants the rent for 4 months. He's been really restricted in terms of the number of people he's allowed to have inside. So, you know, 5 or 10 years ago when he rented this space, it's got an occupancy that he calculated his whole business based on how many haircuts he could give in a day, and he's now forced to immediately reduce that by 50%, while not only having to pay the same amount of rent, but come up with 4 months worth of rent for which he had no business whatsoever. Now, the problem is further complicated by the fact that these office spaces and retail spaces are owned by independent business people themselves who have mortgages to pay on these things. And, you know, they have a lot of tenants who can't afford to pay the rent. So here in the United States, at least, you know, we're really still just at the beginning of this. The health aspect is one thing, and people will say, oh, you know, you can't put money and business ahead of health, but you can't separate them either. How is this guy going to pay for food for his family? How's he going to pay for his health insurance? I mean, I've known him for 22 years, so we had a pretty in-depth discussion, and these are the concerns that many independent business people have. Restaurants have closed. Unique stores here in New York City have closed. Surely Whole Foods and Amazon.com and, you know, these big giant corporate-owned Target and all this kind of thing, they're doing fine, but it's these independent businesses that can't afford to stay open and they're gone.
They're gone and they may not ever return, and this is what Agenda 21 is basically all about, to privatise in the smallest hands possible almost all business of all kinds, so that in the future there will only be chain stores. There won't be independent businesses, there won't be people inventing things. It'll just be you are born, and when you die the world will be the same as when you were born, right? No development, no changes whatsoever. That's what they call sustainable development, and I believe that a better term would be stagnant development.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I don't know how many people have been following Crowdsource the Truth for the past 3 years, but about 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to visit New Zealand for the first time, and it's an absolutely beautiful country. It was very nice to come and meet you, Vinny, and be on your show there. And, you know, it's, I hope this doesn't, you know, come off in the wrong way, but in many ways, countries like New Zealand and Australia, they follow the United States from a political and a kind of a security and military standpoint. There's this relationship, again, I'm sure many of your viewers are aware of the Five Eyes, where the intelligence agencies of these countries cooperate and work together. And frankly, I think it's mostly led by the United Kingdom and the United States. And so countries like New Zealand, Australia, Canada, they often act in concert with the goals and the directives of the United States. And what I observe here in the United States is this sort of corporate oligarchy that has taken over, and they've done it by, you know, funding political campaigns and getting the people into certain offices that can affect their agenda. We see the World Health Organization, which is a component of the UN. Again, I know your viewers are very well informed, Vinny. The Rockefellers donated the land here in New York City where the UN building sits. And just recently, George Floyd's family appealed to the UN to intercede here in the United States because they felt that there was police brutality and that the UN should exert some influence over the United States. That's shocking to me as an American, and frankly, as a New Yorker, I consider the UN to be an invading force. I would like it to be ousted from New York City, and frankly, I think it should be just terminated. It doesn't do any good at all, in my view.
And a lot of people don't know this as well, that the setup of the United Nations, the land used to be owned by the Rockefellers, and they used it as a slaughterhouse, and then they gave it to the United Nations. And many people don't know about the League of Nations that was set up before that. And I can't help but think about 9/11 being some kind of a pretext to bring about the War of Terror, much like World War II was a pretext to bring about the United Nations, and their plans for global domination go on and on and on. False flag after false flag, pretext after pretext. We are being ushered down this road, and until we say stop, it won't stop.
Yeah, you're right, Vinny. And in the case of 9/11, and actually, I'm glad you brought that up. That's part of the reason why I'm outdoors here on the roof, because, you know, in the case of 9/11, they flat out told us that it was a catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor, that they wanted to usher in this new era of American domination. And so I actually watched the World Trade Center burn from right up here on the roof of my apartment building. You can see the Freedom Tower there in the distance. That is the new monolithic, you know, single structure. From two, there come one. And I wanted people to just sort of get a view of New York City from the roof, because, you know, it's a little boring to just have a head on a screen in an apartment. But in order to share New York City with your viewers in New Zealand and around the world, I thought it might be interesting to do our interview from up here as the sun sets. The other thing I wanted people to see is that we're still having a lot of civil unrest in the United States and here in New York City. The NYPD has been under attack by Black Lives Matter supporters and Marxist, basically anarchists who want to end the rule of law here in the United States, and they want chaos, and they want to basically destroy the U.S. government. So there's helicopters in the sky that are patrolling. I could see one over there flying over New Jersey. There was one just overhead moments moments ago. And, from this vantage point on the roof of my building, we can see a couple different things around New York City. We can see over here one of the newest elements of New York City, Hudson Yards. You can see the buildings poking out. Vinny, what do you see on the top of that building right there?
An all-seeing eye Illuminati pyramid?
Yeah, I knew you'd see it. That's exactly what I was talking about. But it's everywhere in our face. It's really unbelievable. And it's, some of these things people don't necessarily notice until you point them out. So I like to talk about these things. I think there's a lot of steganographic messaging that goes on, messages that are hidden in plain sight. Just the other day, President Donald Trump invoked the Production Act, I think it's called. It was from the Korean War that empowers the United States president to redirect various elements of industry here in the United States in a time of crisis, where they can direct certain companies to make things.
And just behind you there, Jason, there's also more Illuminati pyramids. Right on your own roof. You didn't even notice them.
I know. I didn't notice it until you pointed it out, and I've lived here for over 20 years. I mean, I've noticed them, but I never made that connection. Boy, you know what? And see, again, Vinny, now that you mention it, I see them everywhere. Look at these lamps. They're pyramids also. See them?
Yeah.
That's really crazy. Those lamps will be coming on in just a minute. When we go to the north end of the building here, we get a better view of Hudson Yards over there. That really just came up in the last 5 years or so, and it's like a whole new area of New York City. We start to see some of the lights coming on in Times Square. I don't know if you can see it up 7th Avenue there. And then in the background, we've got the Salesforce Tower. We can't quite see the Empire State. You could just see the spire of the Empire State Building just above this building here. Kind of blocks the view, but, nice to get out and see some of the sights here in New York while it's still standing.
Yeah. And this morning, one of my listeners sent me a video from Los Angeles County. Might have been Jackson County. I forget which county specifically. But he was around in the street, Jason, and there were not less than a dozen burnt-out police vehicles. Oh, yeah. There are full-on riots and destabilization techniques going on right now. And this reminds me of what Yuri Bezmenov and G. Edward Griffin were talking about the demoralization and the hyping up of a civil war within America, so that then the communists could come in with their tanks and quote-unquote normalize the situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's happening right now, Vinny. I've been reading this book by Douglas Valentine called The CIA as Organized Crime. And it talks about a little-known CIA program called the Phoenix Program, which came about during the Vietnam War. That was basically the United States doing terrorism in Vietnam. They would kill the families of suspected Viet Cong. They would just terrorize entire villages. And I mean, I guess the idea was just to totally psychologically overwhelm the population so that they would submit. But that tactic, it's remained in use since then. And I think if you knew some of the people who were involved in it, including Robert Mueller, who went on to become the FBI director, actually during 9/11. So, I mean, these people don't seem to have any qualms at all about just raining terror and destruction on entire populations. And another thing that they want to do is, like right now, I would really like to leave New York City. And that's a feeling I never thought that I would have. I was born in New York City. I've lived in New York City essentially my whole life. I've lived in this particular location for over 20 years. And I never thought I would want to leave New York City, but it's just become so oppressive, walking around. It's gotten a little bit better lately during the day. I haven't been accosted on the street in my past 2 or 3 journeys outside, but I no longer really want to go outside. I'm not allowed in any stores without a face mask. There's no socializing or meeting people or anything like that. When I walk around without the mask on, I get angry sneers from everybody. This was interesting. This was a little bit of a sort of impromptu and unexpected social experiment. I had a court hearing that I had to go to 2 weeks ago, and in preparation for that, I needed to send various papers to the court and things like that. So I had to go into FedEx, I had to go into the office supply store, and they won't let you in without the mask. Now, this court case, it had a lot of important, there were a lot of ramifications. I couldn't start my mask protest in this federal court case that's been going on for 3 years. So I had to go into these stores wearing a face mask. And I noticed, when I walk around without it, which is what I normally do, I get angry looks from strangers and just really just the stink eye from everybody. But when I had the mask on in FedEx and stuff, everybody was, oh, have a nice day. And it's just amazing mind control, Vinny. And it's going to transition very rapidly, I think, from the mask to the vaccine. And you're going to have that chip in your hand that's going to have your inoculation history. And if it doesn't show that you've been inoculated from COVID-19 or COVID-20 or COVID-21, 22, 23, they're not going to let you on the airplane. They're not going to let you in the bank. They're not going to allow you to socialize. You'll become this societal pariah. You'll be ostracized from everything and everyone. And the writing's on the wall. This is coming.
This is already here to a large degree, and it goes from the mask to the vaccine to the chip in your hand, and then they have every control over everything that you do, and you are 100% literally a slave. And I was watching Django Unchained, Quentin Tarantino movie, with my wife just the other day, and I noticed that Django, in one of the earlier scenes, was being forced to wear a mask, right? He wasn't able to, because that's what they did to slaves back in the day, so that they couldn't bite their handlers.
Wow. Have you tried it? Within minutes, I am extremely uncomfortable. The only other place where I have to wear a mask is in my friend's barber shop, and I do it because I don't want him to get in trouble. The business can be fined $1,500 if they accommodate somebody who isn't wearing a mask. So, I want a haircut and I want to patronize his shop, so I wear it. But in the 20 minutes or whatever it took to get a haircut, it is so uncomfortable. It's itchy on my face. You can smell your own breath in there. And I brush my teeth and floss them all the time and everything. Not like I've got halitosis or anything like that. But this is not how we're meant to function day to day. And then people say, oh, well, doctors wear masks all the time. Actually, that's not true. Doctors wear masks in surgery and in examination rooms and things like that. And the doctors, if you ever watch a doctor put on their personal protection equipment, they scrub down with, special medical soap. They put on rubber gloves. They put on that mask in a near sterile, if not sterile environment, and they don't touch it. They're not walking around outside and taking it off to talk to people and putting it back on. I've seen people drop them in the street and pick it up and put it back on. Not to mention, the doctor is wearing that so that when your body cavity is cut open and they're operating on you, they don't spit inside you and all that kind of thing. The masks do not protect other people from you spewing out some virus. I've spoken to microbiologists. I've spoken to virologists. I've spoken to medical doctors. The mask is, as far as preventing virus transmission, it's literally, I'm sure you've heard this, it's like putting up a chain link fence to keep out mosquitoes. And it does cause you to re-breathe your own carbon dioxide. This is waste that you exhale. You're not meant to breathe it back in. It's actually reducing your immune system by reducing the oxygenation of your blood and making you more susceptible to getting sick. So it's an unscientific, oppressive, frankly stupid thing for them to even suggest that people do, let alone to mandate it. It's very troubling, Vinny.
Breath is life, and if you take that into account, are we living in the days of power for a death cult?
Maybe so. I have to tell you, it's become pretty bleak. Everybody being locked in your house. We've just missed the spring. My birthday got canceled by this thing. Students, young children are missing entire semesters of school. 5, 6-year-old kids who would be maybe going to school for the first time, meeting friends who they might develop lifelong relationships with and friendships with and learn about social interaction. They're being denied those things, and they're not going to be able to get that back. When you're 30 or 40 or 50 or older, maybe 4 months of your life is not that big a deal, but when you're 5 or 6, there are things that are being, people who are being subjected to things right now that are going to be burned into their brains in an incredibly important developmental time in their life that I'm very concerned for the children of today.
They may grow up with severe personality disorders that will only be able to be kept under control if they have a device in their hand 24/7. And that's what is happening now, I think, is far too many people doing far too much screen time, and the brain hasn't developed over the last million years to do that.
That's right. That's right. And I mean, look, it's one thing. You and I, we use computers a lot. We're on the screen a lot. I didn't start interacting with computers until I was a young teenager. I mean, they weren't really invented or at least available to the public before then. And I am guilty of being on the device a lot. I know you in part raised my awareness to electromagnetic radiation and the interference and the health problems that it can cause. Certainly some people are more susceptible to it than others. And I mean, here in New York City, certainly compared to the relatively rural area or, suburban really, where you are there, just outside of Auckland, right? Or was it Wellington when I came to
Green Bay in Auckland?
Yeah. So, I mean, I am bombarded by electromagnetic radiation right now. When I turn on the Wi-Fi thing on my phone, I have to scroll through a list. I mean, all these buildings around here, everybody's got an apartment, everybody's got a different Wi-Fi router. And I didn't really think about it that much, Vinny, before you and I had our first meeting there. And now I've spoken to many more people who talk about it. And, a lot of these studies are done based on one individual using one device and the EMF output of that particular device. But they don't necessarily take into account, being in New York City or being in a really densely populated area where 30, 50, 100 of these devices might be in operation simultaneously below you, above you, every angle coming at you. So it's not necessarily widely known or clearly understood what the long-term effects of this type of stuff will be. And as you said, young children are interacting with this stuff in many cases from birth. I see remarkably young kids interacting with iPhones and iPads and Android devices, and we don't really know what it's going to do. It's promoting isolation now that people are going to school online. The entire life will be through the screen of a computer.
That's right. And when they brought out these concepts of social distancing, self-isolation, the first thing that occurred to me when I heard those two terms was, what's two of the major causes of suicide in the modern world?
Yeah, maybe depression and isolation, and people. We are pack animals. Tribes, and people need social interaction, and it's rough. We're on a bad road here, Vinny, and I don't think we're anywhere near the end of it. I think we're just at the beginning.
I think we're at the halfway point. Agenda 21 was signed in 1992, and Agenda 2030 is a roadmap on the way to the life of the 21st century. Step by step, that's how you eat an elephant, as they say, one bite at a time.
Now, when you say it was signed, Vinny, who signed it?
Jim Bolger, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, George H.W. Bush, the President of the United States, and all of the other world leaders at that time. I think it was from 112 countries. I forget the exact number, but it was our leaders that went to the Rio Earth Summit that signed it on Prince Charles's private yacht. They signed us up to this. There was no debate in Congress. There was no debate in Parliament. They signed us up to this, and they've been quietly implementing Agenda 21 measures step by step ever since, through your local councils, through your national government. It matters not. All has been penetrated.
Wow, Prince Charles, same guy who was friends with Jimmy Savile and whose brother was hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein. Not good.
Yeah, it all filters down, doesn't it? And I made a point the other day that if the people in Parliament currently have either severe personality disorders or mental illness, it will then start to show up in the population. And I think right now we have a very severely sick society, and it is affecting all of us, whether or not we realize it.
I agree with you. A lot of the problems here in New York City, I believe, can be directly attributed not necessarily to the virus, but to the response by New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who, by the way, I don't know if your viewers in New Zealand are aware, his brother is one of the lead anchors on CNN, Chris Cuomo. So we've got this relationship there where the leader of one of the biggest economies in terms of a state here in the United States, and certainly one of the biggest economies in a city in New York City, his brother is on the news. And, basically we've seen a total stand down of the police here in New York City during the pandemic, followed by these anti-police protests that quickly erupted into riots after the murder of George Floyd. There has not been an adequate investigation into the murder of George Floyd. Of course, it's alleged to be a wanton killing by a racist white cop of a random black man. But in fact, Derek Chauvin and George Floyd, I think a lot of people know, work together on a security detail at a nightclub. What people may not know is that that nightclub is in the same building as the Independent Order of Odd Fellows. And there's also a check cashing business in that building. Now, George Floyd, the police were originally called because George Floyd was accused of passing a counterfeit $20 bill in a convenience store called Cup Foods, which I discovered also has a check cashing business in it. They released the transcript of the 911 phone call that summoned the police to the location. The owner of the store said, "We're a check cashing business." So it's interesting that we've got these competitive check cashing businesses just a few blocks away from one another, and that George Floyd is attempting to use a counterfeit $20 bill in Cup Foods. What a lot of people also don't know is that in January of 2020, U.S. Customs and Border Patrol seized, I believe it was $900,000 in counterfeit $1 bills. Now, that's very unusual for somebody to counterfeit $1 bills because it would just, what does it cost?
It wouldn't be worth the ink that's printed on.
Right. Unless you owned a check cashing business where everybody was coming in there from their jobs at AutoZone and Wendy's and whatever with their check for $329 and $427 and $288. And you had to constantly give out these $1 bills. Oh, and by the way, your check cashing business is in the same place as this bar, club, nightclub where maybe they're spending a lot of $1 bills. So perhaps they can recycle these $1 bills through the check cashing business while depositing your legitimate check. And it could be a very low-risk way to launder millions and millions of dollars through those businesses because nobody's really going to check a $1 bill. If you got a counterfeit $1 bill, I think you'd be more likely to just throw it away if you realized that it was counterfeit or just try to spend it. But, I'm getting off on a tangent here, but the point of the matter is there's a lot about that George Floyd killing that remains unknown. And, it's basically kicked off unprecedented rioting and destruction of our cities in a way that just warrants further investigation so we can understand a little bit better exactly what's going on. So we're getting to the time of night that I wanted everybody to see here. The lights are coming on, so now is a good time for me to switch to our view of New York City here. Let's see, did that work?
Not just yet. And while you're doing that, I did want to make a point, ladies and gentlemen, that COVID did not destroy or close your business. The government did. And George Floyd didn't spark these riots. George Soros-funded Black Lives Matter did.
Yeah. And I think even a lot of the participants don't really understand that, Vinny. Many people here in the United States, myself included, before my guests told me about this, a lot of people were totally unaware of a 1960s and 1970s political activism movement called the Weather Underground. This was a radical anti-war movement that they were very much against the Vietnam War, but they relied on violence. They bombed buildings and attacked the police. They were very, very much into this defund the police, abolish prisons. They wanted no prisons at all, even for violent criminals, murderers, etc. They killed police officers officers. They killed a federal judge. They were affiliated with the Black Panthers and the Black Liberation Army. So there are a lot of analogs between today's demonstrations that we're seeing where Antifa and Black Lives Matter, there's this thing called the NFAC, the Not Effing Around Coalition, that are just marching down the streets with automatic rifles, almost like a paramilitary organization. And I don't think most people in the United States yet fully understand the agenda of this defund the police. The idea is when the population becomes sufficiently terrorized and we are left with this sort of sense that no one can protect us from these violent criminals who want to trash businesses and harass people on the street and just create an environment that is not at all conducive to doing business or living in New York City, it's going to reduce the property values. It's going to leave all of these, retail spaces vacant so that some of the same wealthy industrialists and international kind of billionaire oligarchs that you're talking about, like George Soros, like Bill Gates, like Jeff Bezos, some of the same people that we saw speaking before U.S. Congress yesterday, they can come in and, Amazon.com can take over Whole Foods and, all these non-government organizations and whatever can rent these office spaces and rent these apartments and drive citizens out of New York and basically take over.
That's right. And the question I have now is just of a technical nature, Jason. Could you explain to the listeners the technology that you're using for this broadcast and how they might be able to use it themselves? Because in this election, ladies and gentlemen, we are not going to get a whole bunch of mainstream media coverage, and we are going to become and need to be our own producers to a large degree. And the reason I've got Jason on here today is because I can think of nobody who's better skilled at being an independent broadcaster with advanced technology on a shoestring budget. Jason, please go ahead.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, Vinny, and I'm feeling a little bit stupid right now because I had expected these lights to come on while I was speaking with you, and I'm looking a bit dark, but let's see if I can get some additional light on my face. Right now, I'm actually just using, this is an iPhone 6S, so not even the newest technology. You can buy these on Amazon for about $130. And I've got a DJI Osmo Mobile, which is a gimbal that stabilizes the phone, and that's really important.
Much like one of these.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the same exact one. There you go. And see, the thing that's important about that, Vinny, not just for the aesthetic of creating a stable image so that people don't lose their minds shaking around looking at me, it's very difficult to send video over the internet from New York City to New Zealand and maintain the type of HD video quality that people are used to looking at. And without going into too much detail about how video compression works, by maintaining a stable image, I'm helping the software to do its job better. If it was shaking around a lot, people would notice the frame rate would become reduced and the image quality would be very blocky and chunky, and it just wouldn't look good. And another reason why I wanted to use some of this technology for our interview tonight was because I identified pretty early on that some of these independent news broadcasts that we see on YouTube and elsewhere, they're kind of boring because it's just a guy sitting in front of a webcam. And to the extent that people tune into your show and can now get a view of New York City and just see this section of the city that maybe they've never seen before, hopefully it brings an aesthetic to the production that is perhaps more interesting than if it was just me sitting in my apartment, which not too unique. It could be located anywhere in the world, but now you've got a taste of New York City. And luckily tonight it's pretty calm. There have been nights where there were pretty startling explosions of large fireworks going on that were completely unplanned and kind of disconcerting. There, as I said, there's been a lot of police helicopter activity around, and I just, when I started doing Crowdsource the Truth, it was important to me not only to explore topics and news stories that other people didn't necessarily want to, but also to do it in a way that was engaging to viewers, because I think it's very easy for mainstream news and critics of the types of things that you and I attempt to do to simply dismiss us. And I think it is important that we strive for a higher quality production, so that not just from a technical standpoint, but we've got to scrutinize evidence, and we've got to stick to facts and details even more perhaps than the mainstream news, because people do view what we do with some degree of skepticism, and I understand that. So I try to make my productions as high quality as they can be, because we're trying to capture the attention of people who might otherwise dismiss this sort of stuff.
It's precisely correct, and this is why, look, ladies and gentlemen, you wouldn't go and fight a war against Abrams tanks using a musket, okay? This is the thing. You've got to up your technology. The world has changed. You best adapt and change with it and learn how to use the technology. What would your advice be to those who are technophobic to a degree? I mean, neither you nor I possess a sense of technophobia, but I was wondering if there is something, because a lot of the older candidates and things of that nature, they may find it very difficult to use these gimbals and stuff like that.
They may, it's true, but I would advise people to focus on, the things that they can do. Don't be too concerned with the technology, but, there's a lot of things you can learn. People who are watching us right now obviously are sufficiently technically sophisticated that they can, find videos on YouTube, and it's amazing to me what you can learn from YouTube. I've been watching bar exam videos and lawyer YouTube channels to learn how to defend myself in some of these malicious lawsuits that have come against me, and I'm not recommending that people do that. I'm not trying to give legal advice, but it is amazing what you can find. And if you go onto the internet and look at reviews of some of these gimbals, look at how to use them, there's a lot of different things that you can do, and you don't have to necessarily replicate what Vinny and I are doing. You should start with something that you feel like you can wrap your hands around, wrap your brain around. You want to make sure you're, it's a bad example right now because I'm standing next to an air conditioning compressor and there are no lights on. Normally at this time of night, these lights would be on, and I had expected this to be a much better view of me. But, you want to find a nice quiet place where you can do your production. You want to have a stable frame on your camera. Try to avoid using Bluetooth headphones if you can. People will notice I'm using wired headphones right now. Don't use a speakerphone if you have guests on Skype. There's certain simple things that you can do to improve the quality of your productions. And I'm sure there's even lots of videos from people who are, telling you the best techniques for how to do your own podcasting, your own live streaming. And people have time on their hands while we're under this lockdown. I would encourage people to go and look for those videos and use the information that they can find online to help improve the quality of what they're doing. It's really the information and just having the courage to put it out and to stay on it.
I think that when we talk about getting out there and doing it, this microphone here, I didn't start with this microphone. This Mac in front of me, I didn't start with this Mac. I started with pieces of crap by comparison to what I'm using today. And step by step, ladies and gentlemen, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? All right? You're
absolutely right.
What you
and
can.
It's the same with me, Vinny, you're right. You do what you can. I started out with a much less sophisticated system than I'm using right now. Look, right now, I've got one phone. I just have the email screen up because it's mostly white, and I've turned up the backlight as bright as it'll go, and hopefully it's providing enough illumination so that people can see me. Perhaps it's more dramatic than I expected it to be, but you do what you can. You make it work. As Vinny said, I started with just one cell phone pointed at me in an echoey room, and people complained about the sound, so I got a better microphone, and I started to learn more about how some of these live streaming services worked, and bit by bit I improved the quality of what I was doing, and that's really all you can do. Kaizen is the Japanese term. It describes the process of continually improving a technology or a technique in pursuit of perfection. And I'm not sure about this, but I believe it is thought that perfection is divine and man can never achieve it, but the pursuit of it is noble.
That's right, and listening to complaints and not letting your ego get the best of you. I mean, here's how a mature person handles a complaint. Oh, really? Okay, well, let's think about that, and let's see what we can do to address that concern. Here's how an egotistical, immature person deals with a complaint. Oh, no, I'm just doing my own thing, bro, it's just, oh, no, it's going to be fine. You make every excuse under the sun in order to justify not improving, not changing, and not becoming more sophisticated in the methodologies you employ to get the results you want.
Absolutely. And then, the flip side is that sometimes when you expose yourself to thousands of people on the internet, you're going to get a lot of input from people who are just trolls or trying to be negative. And so don't let that stuff get to you. Vinny is right. Sometimes people will have valid complaints or suggestions or point things out that you might not necessarily notice at first. And I don't think Vinny means to suggest, or at least speaking for myself, I don't respond to everything that everybody says, but sometimes there are valid concerns. There were some people, I recently, during 2020, I increased the performance of my equipment in an effort to broadcast at full HD. And that put certain bandwidth restrictions on certain users. So it took a little while of figuring out exactly how high I could push the quality without making it an impediment for users that maybe had slower internet connections. So you do need that feedback from the audience, but you want to make sure that you're not, listening to people that are just trying to waste your time by complaining and being rude and, telling you about things that maybe you don't have the ability to fix. Like, maybe they don't like the way I look, or they don't like my religion, or they just don't like me. That's not the type of stuff I think that people should listen to. But hey, we can't hear you is maybe you need some different sound setup or something.
Yeah. Hey, we can't hear you. Hey, the humor is putting me off, and since helping out the Nzpp starting last month, it was actually Billy's influence and maybe a few complaints from the people on the Nzpp page about my very flippant nature, and in fact, about a month just before that, my own band told me that the constant laughing at my own jokes and just going on and on and on was actually starting to grate on them. And so I really started listening, especially if your own band is starting to grate on your own band, you've got some trouble, son, and you need to address those issues.
Well, that's a big man who can listen to complaints about his personality and adapt, Vinny. Congratulations to you for being able to acknowledge that and to take that criticism.
Thank you. I know. I'm pretty awesome. Now, the
I think you're funny too. I liked some of that humor.
I mean, it is good, but
it's a balance, right? It's a balance, like anything.
Supposedly, and at the moment, the attempt is to get 51% of the voting population on board with Nzpp, and the way that you do that is you make yourself into a sphere, no edges.
Yeah, that sounds almost like something Bruce Lee would say.
Bruce Vinny. Now, the other side of things as well, when we're talking about the walking around with technology, it helps to beta test things before you're actually taking them out. So how do you test things and stuff like that before going on live streams?
Well, if something's completely new, obviously I'll try it out at home and make sure I understand how to use it. But I've attempted to be really ambitious with some of my productions. I was doing live streams from New Zealand. I've developed a method of actually, having Skype callers call in to my mobile live streams. So even when I'm on a cell phone walking around New York City or walking around Dealey Plaza in Dallas, I sometimes have international callers. Ole Damagard joined me on a Skype live stream where I was in Dealey Plaza and he was in Spain. So that was pretty unusual and interesting. And again, I think it's important that for me, at least, and I felt that viewers would feel that this was important, to bring people something that they cannot get. If we've got hundreds of channels of people sitting in front of their laptop on the webcam, calling people on Skype and interviewing them, that can be very good, but it's also nice to show people something that they haven't seen before. I mean, my background is as a filmmaker and a director and a cinematographer, and it just occurred to me that, in 2016, when I was watching all these videos, we're all very sophisticated television viewers and motion picture viewers. If you go back and look at a news broadcast from 1950 or 1960, it's incredibly simplistic compared to what we see today. They didn't have on-screen graphics. They didn't have a lot of cameras that they were cutting to. They didn't have reporters out in the field or affiliates all over the country and all over the world. It was Walter Cronkite sitting at a desk with a lot of typewriters clicking in the background, and it's kind of quaint to look at it right now. Even motion pictures from the 50s have a much different feel. So when I started, it occurred to me that we all understand this visual language of editing and sophisticated cutting, and it's kind of a language of cinema. So I wanted to make sure that my live stream broadcasts tapped into that, because it's almost as if you were speaking to an adult as if they were a child. You're not going to really be able to convey your message or hold their attention as effectively as you would if you're speaking their language, you know what I mean?
That's right, and I think the main point here is that you have to compare dollar for dollar value, and at the moment television production and film production had such huge costs associated with, and yet you right here and me right here, this is costing almost nothing. It's not nothing. We needed a significant input in terms of purchasing the equipment in the first place, but once you've got the equipment, access to the internet is very, very cheap, and you can do sophisticated broadcasts very regularly. Yeah. I mean, of course, it's not nothing. You and I pay ongoing fees to internet service providers, and we're constantly upgrading the equipment, and there's lots of different video streaming software and monthly service providers that I use, and I'm sure that you use. But the comparison needs to be made. Like right now, you're in New Zealand. You are on a continent sort of exactly on the opposite end of the earth. I'm in the middle of New York City. To do this type of live broadcast just 5 or 10 years ago, we would have needed satellite trucks and multi-million-dollar contracts for satellite uplinks and bandwidth and stuff, and that was a huge barrier to entry. That was why it was, giant news companies like CNN and Fox, and I'm not familiar with the ones there in New Zealand, but people know what I'm talking about. And what we've done now is we've leveled the playing field. Technology has commoditized the tools so that for, 1/100th or 1/1000th of the cost of those multi-million-dollar vans with, lots and lots of people, where there's a camera guy and a sound guy and a technical director and then an on-screen talent person. That was another thing when I started my show, is that I've had a lot of startups throughout my career, and I didn't want to be the guy who's managing a team of people and, paying lots of health insurance for staff and salaries and dealing with personalities and all that problem. It was important to me that it was just me doing it. So I wanted to be the technical director, the camera person, the on-screen person, all that stuff. And this technology allows me to do that. Well, we're talking about a sophisticated methodology for keeping your costs low and using your multiple talents in order to phase out the need for extra help to a large degree. Now, your website there is crowdsourcethetruth.com. Could you actually explain the concept of crowdsourcing to people if they're unfamiliar at the moment?
Absolutely. When I first started it, it occurred to me that I put out a video, and within a day, 700 people watched it, or a couple days, 700 people watched it. And I remember thinking, boy, you know what? I've been talking about all this stuff for years, but the lights are coming on. Good. I've been talking about this stuff for years, but maybe go to dinner with friends or family and stuff like that. Like, how many people am I talking to about the JFK assassination or whatever it might be, 9/11, in a year? Is it 30 people? Is it 100 people? And most of them think I'm a conspiracy theorist and a nut, and they don't really pay attention. But when I put out the video video, and within a day or something like that, hundreds of people saw it. They started sending me comments and responses, and as you said, Vinny, presenting me with alternative ideas that caused me to start to think about things in different ways, and they even pointed me to evidence and new sources of information that led me to other stories and more facts and details about whatever particular topic I was talking about. And so it's about putting out a piece of information to thousands of people, and someone in the audience will say, hey, you know what, I live in that town. This is a great example. We did a story about a guy named Peter W. Smith, who many people have not heard of. Peter W. Smith, he was a conservative political operative. He was a guy, I'll give you an example. He created a fund for the Arkansas state troopers who were coming forward and exposing some of the crimes that Bill Clinton did when he was the governor of Arkansas. And then these guys were being fired, they were being persecuted. So Peter W. Smith created a fund to allow these guys to have money after they came forward, to not be fearful that they would lose their livelihood. Now, flash forward to 2017, he was investigating Hillary Clinton's missing allegedly 33,000 emails. I think there are many, many more. Now, Peter Smith died. I'll let you guess how he died, Vinny.
Car crash.
Well,
or he's
suicided
himself.
Well, they say suicide, but of course, it was a suicide allegedly by asphyxiation from inhaling helium. And the strange thing is, this guy was 80, and that seems like a weird way to kill yourself. So we put out a story about this, and someone saw it, lived in the town where it occurred. And this woman, who is brilliant, she contacted the local news reporter who led her to the police that provided her with a police report. She went to the local Walmart where the guy was alleged to have bought some of the stuff that was in the crime scene photo. And we did this story. They showed the crime scene photos. We showed the crime scene photos, which revealed 2 helium tanks in the room. And somebody watching that broadcast said, hey, I work at Walmart, and here's the inventory list for that Walmart on the date of this death. There was only 1 helium canister in stock. So it remains a question. How did 2 helium canisters arrive in the hotel room to be photographed for the police evidence photos when, and we also got a surveillance video from Walmart that shows the guy only buying 1 helium tank. So where did the other helium tank come from? This viewer of Crowdsource the Truth also tracked down certain information from the hotel about the usage of the electronic keys in the hotel room, and that revealed that 4 keys had been given out, and multiple keys had been used to open the door over the course of the days that the guy was staying in the hotel. So we started to develop this information to the extent that when I called the local police department to ask them some questions about some of these unanswered questions, the police literally said to me, you have more evidence about this than we do. And we're a small police force in a small town. This investigation was taken over by the FBI. So it's very interesting because the Lawfare blog, which is funded by the Brookings Institute, which I hope your viewers will look into the Brookings Institute, and Ben Wittes, a lawyer who is behind this Lawfare blog, who is allegedly the best friend of James Comey. There's also a contributor to that Lawfare blog named Shane Harris, who's a reporter for the Wall Street Journal at the time, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch, who I know your viewers are going to be familiar with. He's now a reporter at the Washington Post. And the third contributor who's relevant to this matter is a British guy named Matthew Tate, who's a former GCHQ employee and a former Google Project Zero employee. Now, I know everybody knows that GCHQ is the British equivalent of the American NSA, and very technologically sophisticated spy agency, basically. But Google Project Zero is a lesser-known entity. That is a semi-secret Google project where they've assembled their own team of sort of elite hackers who are ostensibly going around the internet and finding exploits where they can kind of, tell Sony, hey, there's a problem with your PlayStation, or they can tell Cisco, hey, this particular router, people can tunnel into it and do whatever. And their goal is to make the internet a safer place. Now, you might believe that if you trust Google and think that they're always doing things in your best interest, but if, like me, you think that Google sometimes engages in things that are not 100% on the up and up, you should be concerned about what some of these things are doing. Why are they using the same people that GCHQ is using? Are these things connected to intelligence agencies? What protections do we have against some of the things that they might do that we might not even be able to detect? So it's amazing, Vinny, by putting out these stories and by interacting with the audience, Crowdsource the Truth has gotten some evidence and taken these investigations further than certainly I could do as an independent researcher. It's not a show about me knowing everything, because frankly, I just don't know that much beyond how to use digital production equipment and, booking guests and things like that. I focus on bringing in experts from a wide range of fields and sharing their information among them, among each other, and among the audience. And it's been a remarkably effective method.
That's right, and in listening to what you're saying, there is almost the equivalency with the Vinny Eastwood Show and Crowdsource the Truth. In fact, just yesterday, a listener gave me the contact details for John Rappaport.
Oh, nice.
And I was just like, I'm not going to send it. Okay, let's just send away a request, and then just got a reply just this morning from him. And that's how the vast majority of my guests get on the show, is because my listeners suggest them, give me their contact details, that kind of thing. And this is what Daniel Suter has alluded to on this show, SUTER. Just to search Daniel Suter on my channel to watch his one about direct democracy here, that the wisdom of the crowd is far wiser than any one of us alone. The ability of the crowd to research is far more sophisticated than any one of us could do by ourselves. And just jumping back to the media production costs, the New Zealand media in, I think it was John Key's day in 2008, MediaWorks, the largest private media corporation in New Zealand, was run by a man named Stephen Joyce, who then joined the National Party, which was John Key's party, and he won, and he became the communications minister. His first act as communications minister was to broker a $50 million bailout to MediaWorks for unpaid broadcast licensing fees. And then MediaWorks gave John Key's son a radio show when the radio show's host was away for the weekend, and just kicked him off. He'd been on that radio show for 7 years, and then boom, just got given to John Key's son. And then MediaWorks Radio Live gave John Key, in the middle of the election, this is when we're supposed to be as independent as we can as journalists, right. They gave John Key the Prime Minister's hour on radio every week, but under the key phrase, he wasn't able to talk about politics. Well, if you are a politician and you're hosting a radio show, that is a political act, and such as the corruption of having too much money in your pocket that you have not earned. Now, speaking of which, ladies and gentlemen, New Zealand's own independent media source, the Vinny Eastwood Show.com, needs your donations, needs your support through KiwiBank, PayPal, or Patreon, whichever way that you can support us. And there are rewards as well on the homepage. It says, have you already donated? Click here to get your special rewards. And that means you can get the unlisted video playlist with including a interview with a former New Zealand police constable who didn't want it to be public, and also the video with an archaeologist, Jonathan Gray, who has found the Ark of the Covenant. These guys do not want this stuff out live, but I asked them, is it okay if just my donors are able to watch it? And they said, yes, of course, Vinny, because once you donate to this show, there's a measure of trust in that. Now, we're over time, Jason, but final words for the audience.
Vinny,
blatant self-promotion is absolutely encouraged on this show. It's like a bathtub, doesn't work without a plug.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And then thank you for having me on the show. You know, one of the things you've just reminded me of, and this is a personal choice, from the very beginning, I've been careful to, when suggesting to the audience that they support my show, I don't like to refer to it as donations, primarily because in the United States, charities are regulated by certain laws, and I don't want to mislead people into thinking that they're donating to a charity. So people become sponsors of Crowdsource the Truth, and that's got a really strong message behind it, because when you're watching the news and there are TV commercials, whether it's for a big oil company or a big pharmaceutical company or an automobile company, these are the people paying for the news broadcast. So in the case of, like, you know, Volkswagen had some major scandal over diesel engines or something like that, well, if Volkswagen was sponsoring your news broadcast, they might not want you to do a story about that. So I've made it very clear to my viewers that when they sponsor Crowdsource the Truth by going to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, they can rest assured that they, the viewers, are the sponsors of the show. And so I only have their best interests in mind. And that's been really important for me. It's been really helpful in building the financial support for the show, because as you said, Vinny, you know, even though we're able to do these broadcasts with much lower cost tools, it still does have a cost, and you and I both work independently. So it's important that people who appreciate these broadcasts, from Vinny and from me and from all the independent journalists out there, it is very important that you sponsor and support them so that this type of information can keep coming.
That's right, and this is what James Corbett calls the peer-to-peer economy. He didn't create the term, but he's who I learned it off. And the peer-to-peer economy is different from the regular economy, ladies and gentlemen, where it is the people who consume the product that pay directly for its production. So that's what is happening, ladies and gentlemen. You're not giving a gift of cash to the Vinny Eastwood Show because of something I'm going to do for you. You're doing it because of the work that has already been done. You are saying that, yes, Vinny, you have earned this already. It is yours to do with what you will. And I have to remind people that I'm an incredibly ungrateful little SOB at the best of times. So I just want to say thank you so much for every single cent, every single dollar, every single moment of your attention, every single like, every single share, every single subscriber. And let's make no bones about it here. This show is so good because right over here, ladies and gentlemen, we have our wonderful mods. You can see them in blue with little wrenches next to their name: Benny Mac, Marley Pumpkin, On the Fence with Muzza, Richard Bonner. These are the real backbone of the show here, helping to keep us, and Amos 777, of course, helping to keep out the riff-raff and keep this ship running nice and smooth. Everybody contributes, just like in what was it, Starship Troopers. Everybody fights, no one quits.
There you go.
Jason, thank you so
Vinny,
much for your time.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on, Vinny. It's always a pleasure. Great to see you again, and congratulations on your new daughter.
Which reminds me, it's just the time of the show where I need to show people the reason why I'm fighting for liberty and freedom. It's my little Bubblicious.
Daddy loves you so much because he's just so cute. All right, that's enough. That's enough.
That's my Bubba. Oh, I love it so much. It's just so cute. All right, Jason. Thank you very much for your time and your expertise tonight.
Thank you, Vinny. Take care. I'll see you soon.
See you, brother. All right, that there was Jason Goodman, crowdsourcethetruth.com, Crowdsource the Truth, at Patreon as well, if you do want to support his work. And with that being said, again, just want to thank everybody, including the moderators, the listeners, and all of you for supporting the broadcast today. So, thank you very much for listening to the Vinny Eastwood Show. I'm not a credible journalist. I'm an incredible journalist.